Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to try to bust a couple of myths surrounding the notion of primary colors in painting. If you've learned at school that red, yellow and blue are the true primary colors that you can mix all of the colors from, or if you think that you know better and you think that cyan, magenta and yellow are the only true primary colors, I hope that this video will help you rethink all of that and see a new perspective on the notion of primary color. So let's talk about this notion of primary color. According to the commonly accepted definition, colors are primary if they cannot be obtained by any mixing and if they allow to mix all the other colors. This is the definition you've probably learned at school, and I'm sure you were told that red, yellow and blue are the primary colors from which all of the colors are created. You know, primary colors mixed give secondary colors. Red and yellow make orange, red and blue make purple, and blue and yellow make green. From there, you mix every other color in existence. That's why they are called primary. They can create all the other colors and you can't obtain them by mixing. That's the commonly accepted definition, and it's still present in many serious art books and taught in many art institutions. But a closer look will show us that not everything is so simple. There are some problems with this notion. First of all, there seem to be two functional models at work. On the one hand, the cyan, magenta, yellow model used by printers, and on the other hand, the traditional red, yellow, blue model used by artists. If red, yellow, and blue are so unique and fundamental, how come printers don't use them? So basically, painters would have their own primary colors and engineers designing printers have different ones. Red, yellow, blue, or cyan, magenta, yellow. Which one is correct? Then, the second problem is that it's wrong to say that primary colors cannot be obtained by any mixing. For example, by using quinacridone rose and cadmium yellow, we can obtain a red as chromatic as the so-called primary red of the red, yellow, blue model. And by using phthalo blue and phthalo green, we can get a color that matches the cyan primary of the cyan, magenta, yellow model. Finally, the third problem is that the definition of any individual color in itself is ambiguous. From a physical point of view, there is no difference in nature from one color to another, so I can call magenta what you would call red, or call blue what you would call cyan. This is a confusion that has occurred in the history of color before. Before the words cyan and magenta were common knowledge, these colors were often referred to as blue and red, and their exact hue has changed significantly over time. But even today, who can really say what exactly is a magenta or a cyan? Similarly, for primary yellow, which is less debatable, you may find that the yellow I choose as a primary is too orange and prefer a greener yellow. In short, the infinity of shades makes the definition of primary color very difficult to grasp. So, in the end, what are the real primary colors? Red, yellow, blue, or cyan, magenta, and yellow? Have artists been wrong since the Renaissance using red, yellow, and blue? And why do printer manufacturers use the cyan, magenta, yellow model, and why artists never use these colors? Who is wrong and which model is right? In reality, both models are correct. That's why they're both used. In fact, it's the common definition of a primary color that's wrong. A more precise definition would be a color is primary if it is part of a set of colors combined to form a range of mixtures called a gamut, and if it is impossible to obtain it by mixing the other colors in the set. Alright, you can see that it's less appealing than the first definition, but at least this one is correct, and it changes everything. First, it means that the primary colors can be more than 3. They can be 4, 5, or 6. An artist who has 6 colors on his or her palette actually has 6 primary colors, as long as none of them can be recreated by mixing the others. However, it should be noted that because of our trichromatic vision, the number 3 makes the most sense. It also means that primary colors are not unique entities that are impossible to recreate, and that they cannot create all the colors that exist in the world, only those colors that are part of their gamut. Primaries are not universal. They are only unique within their initial set. Finally, it means that any color can play the role of a primary, with more or less success depending on the gamut that you desire to paint. Thus, we can perfectly accept the common definition of a primary, provided we understand that these are only what we could call the ideal primary colors we're talking about. That is, the 3 pigments from which the widest gamut can be created. And in this regard, red, blue, and yellow do not form a set of 3 ideal primaries because the gamut of these colors is rather limited, and this is why printers don't use them. Now, does that mean that red, yellow, and blue are not good colors for painting? Absolutely not. They work great for painting most things, because most things are actually made of dull shades of brown and gray. It's very rare that you need to paint a very strong magenta or a highly chromatic cyan, so it doesn't really matter. For painters, red, yellow, and blue have a lot of great pigments with very good properties. You see, it's not just about having the widest gamut available. Painters want pigments that behave well, that dry properly with good covering power. With, ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, cadmium red, cerulean blue, yellow benzimida, pyrrole red, you have so many great pigments. On the other hand, cyan and magenta don't have so many varied and good pigments. It's hard to find a good cyan and a good magenta. So in the end, why not stick to the colors that you can trust? And finally, painters like to be part of a tradition. And the tradition has always been to make red, yellow, and blue the central pigments of the palette. So, of course, red, yellow, and blue work great. You need those pigments to paint. But saying that they are the only primary colors you need to paint is just saying too much. They are far from being the ideal primaries, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Who cares what we call them? We just need to paint with them, right? Someone who might care would be an engineer trying to design a printer with an imperative to reduce cost and only select 3 pigments. As an engineer, the pigments that are the closest to the ideal primaries for a printer would be cyan, magenta, and yellow. It's been proven by research in colorimetry. We could call them the true primary colors, but it would suggest that the others are false, and it isn't true. They are just the most practical pigments that a system might use to translate the RGB additive input from a computer to the subtractive mixing of a print. So, do I recommend painting with only cyan, magenta, and yellow and ditch red and blue? No, absolutely not. The notion of primary is imaginary. It's like the equator line for a geographer. It has no real existence, but it can be used as a reference point. I think it's been overrated widely. It doesn't even have any importance on mixing. Any 3 colors, primary or not, can be mixed to obtain a wide gamut. So by convention, I talk about additive primaries for red, blue, and green, and subtractive primaries for cyan, magenta, and yellow. But this is just theory. When it comes to actual painting, I recommend selecting pigments based on the space they occupy around the color wheel. I made this color wheel available on my website. You can simply click the link in the description box and download it for free. Around this wheel, you'll find all the pigments you can use for a given hue range. Think about the subject you want to paint. If you have a bright magenta to mix, like this flower for instance, then you need to consider using a magenta pigment like quinacridone magenta or quinacridone rose. Why would you want to limit yourself to red, yellow, and blue for that? The brightest red will never give you the right hue because it pulls way too much on the orange side of the color wheel. But let's say that you want to paint a simple portrait or a dog or anything. In that case, you don't need this strong magenta here. So red, yellow, and blue will work perfectly fine. In the end, it's just a matter of context. You need to be pragmatic. But, in my opinion, it would be a terrible mistake to think that blue and cyan are basically the same thing. Maybe saying that cyan is some sort of light blue. No. It's a color of its own. It would be like saying that orange is a light red and yellow is a very, very light red. It doesn't make sense. Likewise, saying that magenta and red are the same thing is a huge mistake. And I hope that this lengthy explanation on the notion of primary colors helped you at least realize that. In general, for artists, I suggest thinking about main hues instead of primaries. I like to have one good pigment for each of the 6 main hues: red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. And I'm not using all of them all the time, and I don't pretend that they can mix all the colors in existence or can't be recreated out of any other colors. No, I'm simply pragmatic about it. I want to be able to cover a wide range and not have to face any limitations when I paint. I want to explore all the possibilities of color if I so desire. I don't care about the notion of primary. To me, it's overrated. And it doesn't even help for mixing. If a color looks good, I'll just use it. Alright, to conclude this video, the point was to show you that, well, even though red, yellow, and blue work perfectly well, as do cyan, magenta, and yellow, you can make perfectly good paintings with them, given that you want to paint within the set gamut formed by these 3 colors. But the point of this video was to show you that you don't have to limit yourself to those 3, and you don't have to think that all of the colors will come from them, which is why I don't like to talk about primary color, but I like to talk about main hues. I like to talk about main pigments that I have on my palette. If you want to explore those pigments, you can find them in the PDF that I have on my website, and hopefully it will help you choose the right pigments for your composition, and it will help you get rid of the limitations of only 3 pigments. If you want to learn more about color theory and its application for painters, you can find a link to my color course in the description below. It explores colors in all its dimensions, and it's really a very in-depth course. Before this video ends, I really wanted to thank all my patrons on Patreon. The support is absolutely amazing. Thank you very much, and this video wouldn't be possible without you. If you want to support the channel and join this Patreon, you'll also find the link in the description box. Alright, that's about it. I hope that you'll find the right colors for your composition and don't limit yourself to this weird notion of primary color if it just brings limitations that you don't need in your paintings. I'll see you for the next episode, and until then, have fun painting. Bye.